1975. The South Vietnamese president and many generals took all of their money and fled to France. All the troops knew that they had been deceived by the politicians and gave up fighting and fled back to their homes. My father was in the jungles, Nha Trang at that moment, and knew that the war was lost. He assembled his men one last time to warn them of what to come. Burn all your uniforms, insignias, pictures, anything you have that may identify you as South Vietnamese soldiers. Blend in with the fleeing refugees. Not all of his men came from Saigon, so they split up and flee separately. Only one kid, who considered my father his Su-Fu, or master, came along with him to head to Saigon. During the third night of their escape, they came upon a small friendly South Vietnamese JROTC army camp in the dead of the night in the middle of the jungle. It was the Junior Officer Reserve Training Corps with their trademarked red berets. There was a few watchers awake, and everyone else is lying on the ground around the campfire, apparently sleeping. The kid officer there barely looked 17, asked for their ammo, weapons, food, anything they can use to continue the fight. The kid also asked my father to remain and help them fight in their eternal struggle. Despite my father's best efforts to dissuade them from throwing their life away, they said to him, "It is already too late." The seriousness of these words is lost in translation. The kid rebuffed my father and called him a coward and curses him to be totally crushed, no bones left for your children to weep over. May spirits of your dead comrades and people curse you and no longer offer you their protecting in the dark. My father gave up, gave him everything he had, and went to sleep, since they had been doing nothing but running away. As an experienced jungle fighter, my father never fully sleeps and always has his ears open, lest you want the Viet Cong to slit your throat. He swore that he could hear the kids wake up and stir about normally around the camp with pots and pans and hear them talk in distinct Southern accents. The next morning, he and his buddy woke up and found themselves surrounded by corpses, including the body of the kid he talked to last night. It seems like they died a while ago, rotting corpses and all. The smell was immediately noticeable. Thinking it was just a Viet Cong night attack, he had no choice but to move onward back to his home. Feeling that the North Vietnamese are getting too close, they doubled their pace and travel at night and as light as possible. They tried the main road and found that it was congested with civilians and made a killing field for North Vietnamese artillery. Not to mention the looting and stealing of gold, jewelry, and other crap by other soldiers deserting the front lines. Thus, he decides to stay in the jungle roads. He recalled that around 3 a.m., they happened upon a blind bend on a road in the jungle and cross it. At that moment, a bus came roaring and stampeding towards them in total darkness, like a large shadowy monster, and my father quickly dove out of the way. His buddy was not so lucky and was ran over. He died instantly as the bus chewed up his body under the wheel. While weeping for his friend, my father dragged his mangled body piece by piece to the side of the road. He said that at that moment, the insects silenced, the rustling of the leaves failed, the moon stopped dead in the sky. Then he heard the laughter of children, men and women, echoing, rebounding, and resonating from jungle, mocking him. He fired at the sound with his 1911, emptying it, screaming, "Have I not fought enough for you people? Take me and not him. He's too young. Take me instead. Take me." The laughters replied with complete silence. He dug a shallow grave and made a crude tombstone to make a landmark, so that one day he may come back and properly lay his friend to rest. In the end, only my father made it back alive. 12 of his comrades died. To this day, he could never find his friend's final resting place. My father has a few other stories. This one is what I recall most accurately for now. This story is from my father, who fought in the Vietnam War as a squad leader. Not sure how to translate his rank, but he had 12 soldiers under him as an officer who graduated from an academy. By that time, half his soldiers are barely men. just kids drafted into the war as a replacement for those who have fallen. My grandfather was in Vietnam, and he gave an interview once on his town's news about what the experience was like, and there was one particular story he told that really took the tone a different direction. Big Grandpa and Nam. There are stories about a certain person in a very remote village. They call him the Elephant Man. There are rumors about this Elephant Man being used to torture and kill American soldiers for intel and shit, but the way he did it was what made the Americans shiver. He apparently had a large and really terribly malformed appendage on his body. Not an arm, not a leg, just some hematoma he could move around. He would allegedly shove it down the throats of American prisoners and torture them by strangling them from the inside. Sounded like some X-Files shit. One day, there was a guy who actually managed to escape from the village. Had been running for 2 days, totally malnourished, totally frazzled. But when his senses were gathered, the Elephant Man was the first thing he spoke about. He was a prisoner, about to be shot at a moment's notice. The Viet Cong brought in a man with a sheet over his torso and said to him, "You will tell us your plans of battle, or he will kill you." The Elephant Man removed the sheet, and there it was. A big, terrible arm, jutting from his torso, like it was surgically planted there. They tried to extract his info, but he would not budge. Then the Elephant Man stepped in. Without warning, he jammed the horrible thing into the poor man's mouth, and it forced its way down his throat. The smell and taste were almost indescribably awful, like the combined ass sweat of 100 hairy Greek carpenters. He was relieved of his torture temporarily after that, and managed to escape into the woods due to a faulty knot holding his hands behind him. The guys at the outpost are spooked. A couple days after the prisoner returns, get fucking ambushed by Viet Cong and taken prisoner. Knocked out by an explosion, wake up in a tent somewhere. There are 3 men before Grams. All of them are bound with rope. We're about to be tortured. The Viet Cong enter, and they are angry. The Elephant Man is with them, as evident by the sheet covering something large, protruding from his torso. Oh God, please. Now, Grandpa was skeptical about the stories of the Elephant Man, and he was a seeing is believing kind of guy. He was about to believe more than he thought he ever would. One of the Vietnamese approaches the guy farthest from my grandpa. Asks, "Do you love your country, American?" Replies yes. Viet looks at the Elephant Man. He's already walking over to the poor soldier. The Elephant Man looms over the soldier for a second, as if to size him up. He smiles like a torturer would, and rips the sheet from his body. My grandpa saw what everyone else believed. This is when the news interview got dark. I'll say what Gramps said exactly on the TV. And so the Elephant Man stood there, and I saw. I could live to be 80. I swear to God, I'll remember this until I die. He stood there, and protruding from his torso was a 23-inch long dick. This frickin' thing was massive. Why, this guy's dick must have been at least 10, 12 inches in girth, maybe even more. And I swear to God, he was soft. Soft, I tell ya. He was a grower and a shower. And it was at that moment that I realized he was named the Elephant Man because he could fucking elephant with that thing. Certainly, if it was hard. Oh, the guy must have had a second heart between his balls. It was one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen in my life. The Elephant Man began his torture, shoving his gigantomorph elephant schlong into the American's mouth. The poor man could but allow death to release him from his body, and the gator tail in his throat was so wide that it pressed against his jugular and stopped blood flowing to his brain, killing him. Just as the man was finished with the first soldier, pulling the telephone pole from the esophagus, whose exit was marked by a sickening vacuum sound, explosions erupted in the village. It was American forces, arrived to rescue the prisoners, and then burn the village to the ground and everyone in it. The exit was swift, and my grandpa and the other soldier were taken away by a helicopter to a medical tent on a nearby base. He still thinks about it to this day. The horse-dick sadist, though dead in body, alive as a lingering mimetic danger, a phantom pain, still torturing Americans after all this time. I never asked Grandpa about any war stories after that. I will green text a story my grandpa told me. B Ranger, B 1965, be operating in Vietnam, read Cambodia, Laos, ordered to go to a specific spot and eliminate enemy forces there, come across a small camp of NVA. For men, he was very specific about that for some reason. Waste them. Looking around. Ammo caches, AKs, normal shit to find. Look in the tent. Dead Russian that was killed in the short firefight. All kinds of weird tech in the tent. Experimental night vision and shit. Almost on cue, a blacked out helicopter lands nearby. Paramilitary guys grab up all the strange high-tech equipment and the dead Russian. Tell them to burn everything, even the bodies. Fly away. I believe him. He is an honest man. Vietnam and high humanoid strangeness in wartime. There are a few periods in world history that become murkier than those during which conflict erupts. Within this already darkened jurisdiction of past studies, perhaps no era is quite so strange and troubling as those years during which the infamous Vietnam conflict had been waged. Falling between the final years of the 1960s, the United States became embroiled in the conflict with the intention of aiding South Vietnam, and of course, to bolster the ongoing effort toward the spread of democracy in parts of the world still riddled by communism. So far as historic periods of conflict are concerned, Vietnam is indeed remembered as one of the darker periods in history, and within its shadows of obscurity, there are nonetheless a number of curious accounts and seldom spoken mysteries which have prevailed over the years, begging questions as to what kind of odd operations might have been taking place behind the scenes, so to speak. That is, of course, if such strange stories can be believed. Indeed, some of the more bizarre accounts from the Vietnam years are so strange they might likely fall beyond the jurisdiction of what can even be considered believable. And yet, the stories persist, which include accounts of friendly giants, glowing non-humans, and winged Wonder Women drifting about the deep jungles by cover of night. The stories of strange humanoid beings appearing during the Vietnam conflict are many and varied, with one of the most memorable accounts stemming from the summer of 1969, near the Da Nang province, where Earl Morrison and his company witnessed something truly out of the ordinary. He and his two companions had been stationed during a watch above a bunker near the city of Da Nang, when they, three of them, began to notice a strange figure moving toward them from overhead in the distance. It looked like a woman, a naked woman. She was black. Her skin was black. Her body was black. The wings were black. Everything was black. But it glowed. It glowed in the night. Kind of a greenish cast to it. There was a glow on her and around her. Everything glowed. Looked like she glowed and threw off a radiance. We saw her arms toward the wings, and they looked like regular molded arms, each with a hand and fingers and everything, but they had skin from the wings going over them, and when she flapped her wings, there was no noise at first. It looked like her arms did not have any bones in them, because they were just limber, like a bat. She started going over us, and we still did not hear anything. She was right above us, and when she got over the top of our heads, she was maybe 6 or 7 feet up. We couldn't do anything. We didn't know what to do. We just froze. We just watched what was going over, because we could not believe our eyes. So we watched her go straight over the top of us, and she still did not make any noise, flapping her wings. She blotted out the moon once. That's how close she was to us. As we watched her, she got about 10 feet or so away from us. We started hearing her wings flap, and it sounded, like regular wings flapping. And she just started flying off, and we watched her for quite a while. The total time when we first saw her and could almost define her until we lost sight of her and were unable to define her was between 3 or 4 minutes. 14 researcher John Keel featured this strange story in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, as it obviously appeared to detail the presence of a large, winged humanoid, similar to later reports of a creature allegedly seen around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, around the same time. There were, however, other reports of so-called mystery beings seen during the Vietnam years. In his book, UFOs in Wartime, author Mac Maloney recounts a curious story where one soldier claimed he was saved by a giant that appeared and attacked an approaching enemy. As this rather odd and whimsical story goes, the witness claimed to have been assisting a landed helicopter which subsequently took off after being repaired, leaving the witness slightly disoriented and, eventually, lost in the jungle. Soon afterward, he would claim that he heard the voices of oncoming Vietnamese soldiers, and just as one had attempted to confront him, he heard a loud crack, followed by the appearances of the dead enemy soldier in front of him. There, behind the dead would-be assassin, stood an 8-foot-tall giant, dressed perfectly and clad in an odd-looking helmet, who told him to return to his helicopter. Not all reports of encounters with beings during the Vietnam years were quite so benevolent, however. One story, shared in Martin S. Calden's book, Natural or Supernatural, detailed a peculiar story the author claimed to have collected from one GI who, along with his company, made the claim of having met a group of terrifying, glowing yellow humanoids that were impervious to gunfire. The story had been related to Caidlin by a U.S. Marine calling himself David E. Gower, having allegedly transpired on December 17, 1974, while serving the 5th Special Forces Group Marine Detachment. It had been an ambush, and Gower and his team had been carried upriver by a boat and deployed carrying Browning automatic rifles, a .45 caliber Thompson subgun, 4 M16 rifles, and an M79 grenade launcher. As Gower and his company traveled along, they reached a clearing where they found that none of the usual outdoor sounds, not even the familiar sound of insects common to the humid jungle landscape, could be heard. At this time, one of the soldiers became aware of a large deposit of strange-looking fecal matter. Shortly thereafter, the soldiers claimed to see at least 3 large, yellow, ape-like beings emerge from the nearby forest. These creatures were between 7 and 8 feet tall, yellow in color and glowing. At first, Gower and his company remained concealed, but upon initiating a retreat, were then pursued by these beasts, which Gower claimed were essentially impervious to the heavy fire of their weaponry. Miraculously, Gower and his company said they made it back to their boats, and claimed that the entire way back down the river, they were able to see the bright glowing in the distance along the shoreline, presumably emanating off the bodies of these terrifying creatures. Can such strange claims of encounters with mystery humanoids be taken as anything more than mere myth and fantasy? The Phu Quoc Vietnam UFO Crash. What was it? What was the UFO that crashed near Phu Quoc Island, Vietnam, in May 2008? The Russians contend it was a U.S. military aircraft, SR-91 Aurora, that was shot out of the sky. Cambodia made an early announcement that it was an unidentified plane that had exploded, but soon retracted the statement. Soldiers from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand searched and found metal that could not be identified to any known aircraft. As well, the Vietnamese released video and images of the wreckage, which had strange, unknown symbols or characters embedded on it. So, what was the Phu Quoc UFO? After a UFO allegedly exploded above Phu Quoc Island off the coast of Vietnam, metal debris was recovered that suggests the object may have been built by extraterrestrials. According to the officials at the state-run Vietnam news agency, an unidentified flying object exploded at about 10 a.m. on May 27th over the northern part of Phu Quoc Island. Colonel Nguyen Van Quay, a military commander on the island, was the source of the report, and no civilian, commercial, or military aircraft are said to be missing in that area of southern Vietnam or nearby Cambodia. The object that crashed was first seen in the skies over Cambodia, where officials said it appeared as a fire in the sky. The thing exploded shortly after that, and what was left of it crashed on the Fuquoc Island. Citizens of a commune on the island retrieved a piece of the metal from the crash that they described as measuring 1 meter by about 60 centimeters. The metal is unusual looking and appears to have symbols engraved or stamped into it. Additional pieces of metal were recovered by members of the military and civilians. At this writing, there are 14 pieces in possession of the military command of Fuquoc District. The metal debris rained down in Gandao and Kwakang communes on Fuquoc at about 10:20 a.m. on May 27, 2008, according to Lam Kwang Chan, a spokesperson for the Provincial People's Committee. While it's entirely possible that the sightings and recovered material may have nothing to do with an alien spacecraft, the events surrounding the crash are similar to other incidents involving UFOs. For example, some of the symbols that appear to be engraved or stamped into the metal, if they are genuine, are similar to those described by witnesses on the thing that crashed near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in the 1960s. An I-beam from the Roswell UFO crash in 1947 was also reported to have unknown symbols on it. I knew an old man named Foster who lived in Colorado by himself with his dogs and cats. He smoked a pack a day. Growing up, I had always heard that he fought in Vietnam, but he didn't talk about it much. During my senior year of college, I took a class called Vietnam War Era History, which was taught by an ex-Army veteran who was under the auspices of Operation Phoenix. He asked us to either read a book about Vietnam or to find a Vietnam vet and interview them. Long story short, I drove up to Colorado with my GF and my buddy. We went skiing and smoked weed. It finally came time for him to tell his story. I'll greentext it because it will come out better that way. Foster joins in 62, volunteered for the draft, goes to Fort Gordon, Georgia MP Academy, joins up with the 560th MP Company, gets stationed at the Hood, volunteers to go to Vietnam because non-coms are asking for people who want to do something interesting, and Foster says sure. Flies in a 4-engine turboprop from Fort Hood to Oklahoma, Oklahoma to Oakland, Cali, Oakland to Hawaii, Hawaii to Wake Island, Wake Island to Guam, Guam to Manila, Manila to Saigon. Phew. Gets stationed at the Tom Sun Nut Air Base. Jumping Joe Stillwell wanted helicopter gunners. They needed 16 guys from Foster's company. Foster, ever the volunteer, says I'll do it. Foster's training consists of riding in the back of a pickup truck and shooting at targets with an M2 on the runway at the airbase. Base is pretty chill. Enlisted men and officers hang out with each other and are each other's friends, because at this point in time, Vietnam was the Wild West. There weren't any rows. There wasn't really any conception of civilians being differentiated from the insurgents. Viet Minh and Cong. Remember, this is before Kennedy got killed. Most Americans don't even know Vietnam exists, so the US forces did what they wanted. Foster reiterated that the VC didn't do much to US forces when he was there, because the Vietnamese hadn't yet seen the US as a threat. Regardless, VC still threw grenades into the base, but Foster never had to haul ass to the bunker to avoid rocket fire. After training, which was cursory at best, Foster was a bona fide helicopter door gunner on the Sikorsky H-19s and H-44s. Foster's crew ferried people all over the place, even up to the DMZ, and even more likely into Laos and Cambodia. At this point in the story, when Foster started talking about missions, he began to get defensive about his service. I reassured him that I did not judge him negatively, and that I appreciated his service. Foster killed a lot of people. Definitely killed women and children. He said, if there was a guy with an SKS or AK spraying the set of your bird with fire, you lit up his whole block. The crew would do raids and close air support for guys on the ground, ARVN mostly. Foster would rain down hellfire on the entire country of Vietnam with impunity. Foster's officer friends were Skyraider pilots. Some of the Skyraiders had tandem seating. Foster said the Sky Raider pilots would fly up and down the Mekong and blow up sampans, little wooden boats, with their 6.50 calibers. The boats didn't even need to shoot at them, or have evidence of being supportive of insurgents. The pilots were just told to fuck shit up. Foster said the recoil from all 6 guns was enough to stall the Sky Raider. Back to door gunner. Foster got shot at with everything. Arrows, rocks, and of course bullets and RPGs. One day, Foster's twofold. Goes into Saigon to see a French dentist. No American dentists at this point in time. Huge throng of locals blocking the street stopped Foster and his jeep from continuing. In the middle of the street/intersection, Foster sees a Buddhist monk douse himself in gasoline and light himself on fire. Pretty much at this point, Foster literally has a heart attack. He shuffles back to his trailer and pops some nitro pills to help his heart. After getting everything settled, he smokes a cigarette and comes back inside. Sky Raider pilots had pet tigers on base. Foster continued doing helicopter runs until his tour ended. Goes back to the US to do stateside duty. Enlistment ends, and Foster leaves the army. A few years after he left the military, some friendly gentlemen from Angola asked Foster to fight for them against commies in Africa. Foster declined, and continued working as a fireman in Louisiana. Foster died a year later. I felt I should tell his story here, so we can all try to imagine Foster's experiences and remember his service. My uncle told me this story years ago, so I don't remember every detail, but I saw his medals. A little info on my uncle before I start this. He's been hunting since he was 8, and my family considered him a very good shooter. He went to Vietnam willingly. As in, he wasn't even up for draft, but he volunteered anyway. Uncle in a Vietnam. Him and his best friend get assigned to night watch. All going well. Getting bored. They switch posts for a reason I cannot remember. Suddenly, an explosion. Uncle is thrown to the ground with shrapnel in multiple parts of his body. Buddy is laying in a pile of dirt some distance away and is unresponsive. Uncle immediately crawls over to his buddy to try and bring him to some kind of cover. Suddenly VC everywhere, running from the tree line towards their position. Uncle begins shooting them with issued weapon. I never asked what he was using because he told me when I was 14 and I wasn't into firearms yet. Laying in dirt, protecting Buddy for what felt like hours, he said while killing numerous VC. After some time, the fighting stops, and my uncle and his friend are dragged to safety. His friend stepped on a VC mine and one of his legs were basically shreds, but still alive. Uncle receives Purple Heart and various other medals. Can't remember anything specifically besides Purple Heart. Still best friends with him. They talk at least once a week and visit each other. My grandfather used to tell me stories from Vietnam when I was a kid. He started telling his stories just like normal. Suddenly see a chilled look in his eye as he gets further in. Talks about a pitch-black reconnaissance operation that he did with about 8 men. Tells me that the entire squad began to hear noises. Suddenly, one of his squad members shoots into the bushes while screaming. Squad leader punches him in the face, grabs him by the neck and whispers, "Why the fuck are you shooting?" They say they saw a deformed, twitching Marine in the distance, just staring at him. By this point, the entire squad is standing still. Massive screeches let out in the distance. Grandfather then tells me that him and his squad bolted out of there. That's all he told me. Whenever I would ask him to tell me more, he would just pass it off or ignore me. I got one from my grandmother's brother. I always call him Uncle Sonny. Be in Vietnam. It's his 3rd tour. He volunteered for all of them. Gotta pick up some cherry-ass LT and take him to some FOB, I believe. Has to drive through a crowded village to get there. Slows Jeep to a crawl to avoid GTA-like incident. Both him and the cherry see a smiling young girl holding a basket of fruit beckoning them to take it. She starts walking towards the Jeep. She gets pretty close. She gets her face blown off with a 12 gauge my uncle kept next to the driver's seat. Both of them were covered in gore. Cherry flips out and demands to know what the fuck is going on, while panicking. Uncle responds, she was walking too fast. Turns out, there were a bunch of grenades in that fruit basket, and my uncle used his sixth sense that day to save the day.